Hey guys, Sam Benger here with Game Plan T1D. I have just a few housekeeping items to go over before we get started on today's episode. On October 13th, we are partnering with T1D in Action, an active support group for people with type 1 diabetes, for a morning of exercise and learning. We'll be hiking Blue Hills and hearing from a few different speakers on managing diabetes and the resources that you should be aware of as a diabetic. For anyone in the greater Boston area during that time, there will be a post on our social media about that opportunity coming up shortly. So be on the lookout for that post if you're in the area. Outside of that, we've got some amazing guests lined up, as I mentioned last week. I don't want to spoil anything, but I'm incredibly excited to sit down with this group of individuals and share their stories with you. So again, be on the lookout for these episodes as we head into October and November. This week on the Game Plan T1D podcast, I sat down with former Yale football player and aspiring medical doctor Roy Collins. Roy excelled in football after being diagnosed at age 13 with T1D and is now working through several residencies in order to earn his medical degree. Roy and I discussed how his medical passions were impacted by his diabetes and how he plans to give back to the T1D community. So without any further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Roy Collins. All right, well, with that, welcome to the Game Plan T1D podcast. I'm your host, Sam Benger. Today we are sitting down with Roy Collins, former Yale offensive lineman and aspiring MD. Roy, what's going on, man?
Good. Nice to talk to you. Yeah, appreciate you guys.
Yeah, so I think you either liked one of our old posts or something like that, but I read just a fascinating article about your background and, you know, coming from an athletic background and you know, obviously being diagnosed with T1D and then kind of using that as motivation and pivoting into the medical field right now. But I wanted to ask, what's your current schedule looking like? It's looking, based off your social media, that you're kind of doing some different residencies right now. So I just wanted to ask how that was going.
Yeah. So definitely found you guys on Instagram. Just been pretty active in that diabetic T1D community, which is great. Definitely appreciate kind of all the interaction there. I'm in a little bit of a whirlwind type of schedule myself. So I'm a fourth year medical student right now. And so the way that it works is you have the way medical school is broken down kind of in the traditional system is you have 2 years of what they call preclinical years, in those 2 years, it's sort of like a college extended type of feel. You're mostly in lectures, and you're kind of getting your base knowledge, your base medical knowledge, and they're sort of taking you through all the different body systems, and you're learning about it mostly from books and videos, and there's some practical applications, but again, mostly kind of your standard textbook lecture style. And then your third and fourth year are clinical years, so you sort of ditch the classroom and you're, doing actual rotations, sort of training to end up becoming a physician. And so your third year is spent going through the required rotations. Mm-hmm. So the required rotations are going to be internal medicine, pediatrics, neurology, psychiatry, surgery, family medicine, as well as OB-GYN. And so different programs have different lengths for those, and you get to sort of do a little bit of inpatient, outpatient, mostly inpatient though, and kind of just get your basic clinical knowledge, and sort of you apply what you learned from the first couple of years as well as, much more sort of on-the-job training. And then what happens in your fourth year, you're able to, as you're sort of closing in on what you actually want to do from a specialty standpoint, you're then able to kind of have a more elective-based schedule. So there are still some requirements, but for the most part, you get to actually sort of do whatever you want to do as you finish out your required standardized testing and you start applying for residency. I actually sent in my application this past weekend, so that's a big kind of weight off my shoulders. And with the kind of open elective type of schedule, what you can also do is do away rotations. So I go to school in St. Louis, Missouri, but I'm sort of looking at a few other places as far as residency. And so whether it be before or after your application kind of has different implications, but what you have the opportunity to do is to see a different system outside your system and even a different patient population outside of the one that you're usually sort of working on in the clinical setting. So I've been kind of traveling all around as I've had different away rotation opportunities offered towards me. And you're kind of catching me in the middle of one right now. I'm currently in New York City, working with the HIV population in psychiatry, which is my specialty of choice. So I'm able to sort of work with a population that, is dealing with a very famous infectious disease and kind of see all the different components that go into it, because it goes way further outside of just the medical considerations. There's a lot of psychosocial considerations as well. And so that's where psychiatry kind of plays a role in assessing, how the disease can actually impact some of your mental status and your emotions, as well as just kind of, dealing with something very chronic. And that's also sort of what ties into my specific niche within psychiatry and my personal history with diabetes. I'm really interested in looking at how we can use kind of more psychosocial modeling and kind of how mental health can actually impact the treatment of chronic illness. So that's sort of what, I bring to the table. That's something I've sort of studied a lot as I've built myself with my chronic illness and in my diabetes diagnosis. And that's sort of where I'm going, and we'll see where it goes.
Well, Roy, I give you a lot of credit, man. Apparently 4 years at Yale wasn't enough studying for you, so it sounds like you're getting a definite, a well-rounded experience in going through these different rotational programs. I want to eventually get back to, how you determined that psychiatry was an important aspect with regard to diabetes and endocrinology. But for the time being, I want to go back, kind of wind back the tape to your kind of growing up. I heard, and based off of the article I read, you grew up in Houston. Really, Texas overall is a massive hotbed for football, and I wanted to get your background in, how that kind of became a passion for you, and also kind of tie that into your diagnosis story as well.
Sure, yeah. So football was a major part of my growing up. And growing up in that state, you can't wait until you can play. I never played Pop Warner, but I did, start as soon as it was offered in my middle school. I came from a big football family. I had a first cousin play in the NFL for some time. I had I think it's cousin once removed, a cousin through my mother who also played in the NFL kind of back in the 70s. So, through those two, and then just sort of like a general atmosphere, very conducive to playing football. And I going to games as a kid, seeing my cousins, all my cousins playing, and just kind of watching sports with my family. That's what we do. We any sort of big family event, especially like Thanksgiving, we're all watching football and sort of giving, what's now known as hot takes about the teams going on. And I remember my grandfather sitting at the breakfast table was always reading the sports section in the paper, kind of seeing what the local high schools were doing as far as the records, even without knowing anybody on the teams. That's just kind of the atmosphere we grew up in. So as soon as the opportunity came for me to play, I was definitely there. And I just, loved the sport from when I was a kid, and getting to play was great for me. And so actually my diagnosis with diabetes in football was pretty much kind of coinciding, because I'd only played a year before I got my diagnosis. I was diagnosed in the fall of 2004 during my 8th grade year. And so that was pretty much my first question. It was definitely a big shock to get diagnosed and to kind of go through, that sort of healing and understanding of what it means to be a diabetic. Pretty soon after kind of getting the overall course of what it's going to mean, my first question was, can I still play football? I've heard people who have gotten bad answers as far as that, but luckily my pediatrician said, oh, no, you should be able to keep playing. And so that's pretty much all I needed to know. I think I might have asked a couple, eating and drinking questions from then on, but as long as I could still play, I was pretty much cool. And sort of the act of playing and managing my diabetes has definitely been something that, still, even after I'm done playing and continue to exercise, is a big part of my life. And so I definitely will always sort of relate my football career and my diabetes, because it's been, it's had a lot of ups and downs, but it's also, got me in touch and got me to, interact with so many cool people. So kind of a blessing in disguise on that front.
Definitely. I've repeatedly said T1D can certainly be a blessing in disguise. I wanted to talk to you. I read that your mom was also a pediatrician. Was that kind of part of the process in terms of you not necessarily being overwhelmed by the diagnosis and not hearing one of those horror stories where the doctor says, you know what, you're never going to be able to play sports again? And how was she able to sort of impact that diagnosis news?
Yeah, well, for one, I got diagnosed really early. As far as horror stories, I heard a lot of stories about people basically, having signs and symptoms of diabetes for years before they were actually diagnosed. I had the pretty classic symptoms of having to urinate pretty frequently and drink a lot of water. After about a week of that, I was already sort of in the clinic to be tested from there. So that was probably the biggest blessing. I didn't have like my growth stunted or, any other kind of terrible side effects that people who go a long time without being diagnosed have. And then, it definitely was pretty helpful to have a mother who was a pediatrician, just because she just sort of knew what was going on, and she was able to speak to the doctors who were treating me in on kind of like a peer-to-peer level. And so, we were able to kind of fast track our way through some of the process, and they were very comfortable, putting me on certain plans because they knew that she was very kind of health literate. Yeah, there wasn't anything kind of lost in translation. One of the big things that I can kind of speak to now from the provider standpoint is sort of making sure that all the different aspects of your chronic illness is going to be understood. And that's a big problem with people who don't have that luxury and who aren't as health literate. You hear a lot of misnomers like, oh, well, I'm allergic to sugar, or I remember I treated a diabetic patient in the clinic once who was under the impression he needed to eat every single time he took insulin, which obviously caused his blood sugars to kind of constantly be sky high. Wow. So I was able to avoid a lot of those kind of misconceptions just because I had a mother who was right there and who could help kind of interpret everything that I had questions about.
Yeah, there certainly is a lot of misinformation out there, and you'll do a search on Google for diabetes, and it's not a lack of information by any means, but it's more of, an abundance and an inundation of. Yeah,
it can be very overwhelming.
Yeah, it's overwhelming. But so an 8th grade diagnosis, you're heading into high school, a time where you're certainly taking on and acting a little bit more independently. And I was diagnosed when I was 5 years old, so I grew up with diabetes, and by that point I had taken on a lot of my care on my own and started doing things independently, whether it was dealing with an insulin pump or checking my blood sugar, all things of that nature. But what was it like for you being diagnosed in 8th grade and then kind of transitioning into high school and taking football a little bit more seriously? How was the burden of diabetes at that point, and how were you able to maintain a stable level of blood sugar as you were playing pretty competitive football?
Yeah, so there's a big part of me that almost wishes I had gotten diagnosed with it earlier so I could have grown up with it like you did. Because having the diagnosis of diabetes right when you're in that kind of rebellious phase wasn't exactly the best thing for my health. I sort of grew up with football and diabetes, but I had already had plenty of growing up to do as an almost 14-year-old, with it. And so, definitely a lot of bad habits as far as what I like to eat and drink, and, a lot of sugary sodas and pancakes and waffles and donuts and all that kind of stuff as far as what I like to do. And so all of a sudden putting that to a halt, I think I was able to come to grips with it right away. But, as time goes on and you're a little more used to the diagnosis, some of those old habits sort of pop up. Yeah, I mean, the honest truth of it is I didn't really do that great of a job of controlling it in high school. A lot of it has to do with sort of that health literacy we're talking about earlier. And so I actually went to a boarding school during my 10th grade year. So I was home in 8th grade and 9th grade, and we had moved around. We had moved from Houston to this town called Carbondale, Illinois, which is about an hour and a half, 2 hours away from St. Louis, Missouri, but on the Illinois side. I played with diabetes in Houston in 8th grade and in Carbondale 9th grade, but I transferred schools for academic reasons to a boarding school in Connecticut called Choate Rosemary Hall, and from that point I was on my own. So at this point, I'd only been diagnosed for a couple of years. It's still relatively new as far as, especially when you think about kind of the rest of my life in comparison to these 2 years with diabetes. And so the truth of it was my control wasn't great because, as a lot of diabetics know, as far as if you had to aim one way, being low is very uncomfortable. You feel weak. You have all these symptoms of sweating and again, weakness, hunger, sort of inability to kind of concentrate, and it's very scary. So if you had to kind of, in the short term, think about which way you're going to lean, I was going to lean high. And so, I certainly didn't have the kind of thought process clarity that I'd like to have. And, maybe I was getting dry mouth and having to urinate a little more frequently, but I would sort of take that because it meant I wouldn't have to stop playing. And I didn't have, an extensive coaching staff and training staff that was acutely aware of what was going on, again, because while a lot of people have, type 2 diabetes, not a lot of people have dealt with type 1 diabetes, especially at the high athletic level. And so I would, rather be sky high. I often was sky high, which definitely, like, I could have played a lot better. I could have been a lot less fatigued. I remember I played on both sides of the ball in high school, both offense and defense, as a tight end and a defensive end. And I would just crumble during halftime and just, try to drink as much water as possible just because I was so fatigued, either from just, playing so much and at the time, having a high blood sugar. And as long as I just kind of waved off anyone who asked questions, no one would really kind of interpret further. It wasn't great. And when my A1Cs came back as high as they did, my mom, who again is a pediatrician, definitely had a lot of concern and even threatened to pull me out of school to bring me back home so she can watch over and all that kind of stuff. And I was able to just kind of say it'll get better, it'll get better, it'll get better. And luckily, sort of towards the end there, and especially in college when I had a lot more attentive training staff, then it did finally get better, and I was able to sort of find a routine that worked. But for a lot of high school, I was perfectly content with being out of control. Which is a big kind of motivator to doing what I'm doing now to help fellow athletes, especially teenage athletes, sort of avoid the mistakes that I made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wanted to ask, I actually had on the podcast a couple episodes ago a quarterback who had just graduated from Columbia, and we were talking about whether his T1D had come up in the recruiting process, and I also played collegiate football, and it didn't for me, and it didn't for him, which was kind of, it wasn't that we were actively trying to hide it or anything like that.
Right.
It just didn't come up. And I wanted to get your take. You're in boarding school in Connecticut, being looked at by some top programs, and obviously ended up at Yale. But what was that recruiting process like? And, were the coaches aware, the Yale coaches, that you were battling T1D at this point?
I think I had a similar experience to you guys. It didn't really come up. It wasn't that I hid it either, but I also wasn't going to, volunteer that information, especially early on. I think the first time I sort of brought it up might have been either kind of just before I arrived or maybe as I arrived, just because I didn't, it can get kind of tricky. I didn't want to, have them be scared away. But again, it wasn't really, in general, my attitude about diabetes in high school wasn't one that was forthright with it. But if you were to ask me questions about it, I would also, go ahead and volunteer that information. But my general sort of persona with diabetes is kind of, I'll have the clip on my pump, but I won't wear it outside of my pants. I'll just kind of put it in my pants pocket. I'll check my blood sugar, not in a dark alley somewhere, but I'll do it relatively discreetly, and I'll give myself insulin relatively discreetly. I'm not one to bring attention to myself. And it wasn't until basically in college when people asked me specific questions about it and then later wrote about it that I even realized people cared in that way. I didn't really see the benefit of kind of, being a little more present, a little more vocal about it, just because there's so many other people who were going through it as well. My attitude was always just sort of, fit in, keep it rolling, and don't necessarily make a scene. And so as it goes to recruiting, that's sort of what it was as well. I wouldn't hide the information, but I certainly didn't bring it up. And if they never really asked me about it. Any of the schools that were sort of talking to me seriously and recruiting me, it didn't really come up in that process either.
So I got to ask, you get to Yale, you're playing Division I football. A, what was that transition like? And B, how do you sort of think back on those times were there things you could have done from a diabetes standpoint to have substantially improved your treatment? And you kind of made it sound like it was while you were at Yale that it was sort of a turning point in terms of getting that management really dialed in.
Most definitely, yeah. So I'll talk about what the transition like from a football perspective, and then again kind of circle back to what it was from a diabetes management perspective. It was overwhelming, boy. So from so many different aspects, my school at the time is small, and they're actually a little bit better now as far as taking the football program seriously. But when I was enrolled there, it wasn't taken nearly as seriously. As far as a playbook, especially offensively and defensively, we really didn't have much. So I was recruited to Yale as a tight end at first. So just looking at this extensive playbook and knowing all the different run blocking and pass routes I always call it it was football calculus. I was going from maybe algebra 1, algebra 2 to just straight up BC calculus right in the day. So that was incredibly overwhelming. I was pretty good at my high school. Again, I was starting both ways, and I was a captain, and football came relatively easy to me. and then to just go to a Division I program where it came easy to everyone else, and everyone else had all these accolades. You had people who were, Mr. Football, Gatorade Players of the Year in their states, all state, all this. People at Yale's is interesting because you have a mix of folks who, Yale was the biggest program that offered them, and also folks who, were offered by, major programs. I think we had guys who were offered by, a lot of the military academies, by like Stanford and, some other kind of big time schools, Notre Dame, as well as transfers from big programs as well. We had a few from Boise, from UCLA, from Nebraska. And so just sort of getting around people who, you're all of a sudden not the big fish in the small pond, quite the opposite. I just remember the first day we had workouts. We're in the gym, and again, used to a small setting, worked out a little bit in high school, but didn't really have to as much. I'm kind of a bigger guy naturally, and I'm pretty athletic, so I'd kind of gotten by without like really taking weightlifting all that seriously. And, there's just hard rock pumping through the speakers, and all these guys who are much bigger and stronger than me, just, pushing weights with chains, and, this guy's jump roping ferociously, hair flying in the wind. I just will always remember that kind of opening scene. Plus, because I went to a small school, I was on a small team. And so, I'm used to, my football team only being, maybe 30, 40 guys, and all of a sudden there's 110 of these, again, big aggressive men, grunting and pushing weights and everything. And I'm just like, what did I sign up for? This is nothing that I can, that I'm familiar with at all. So, I would say from that moment to trying to learn the playbook, to go down the field and just seeing all these superior athletes, it was a lot. But, luckily after that initial shock of an initial season, I kind of progressed myself and got used to it, and luckily was able to have my own sort of success.
So at the same time, you're dealing with all of this transition
right.
on the ball field, on the gridiron. It sounds
right.
like your aspirations as an MD and as someone who could potentially give back to the T1D community from a medical professional standpoint kind of solidified. So talk to us about what kind of sparked that for you.
Yeah, so I'll start out with, again, just sort of going through how my management got better and kind of talk about that process as well. So again, high school, everything was sort of put on my shoulders. I could tell the coach whatever, I tell them I'm high, tell them I'm low, tell them I'm good, and they just kind of take my word for it and keep moving. But in college, thankfully, they took very good care and took a lot of effort into checking my blood sugar and not just taking my word for what I said it was, and kind of helping me to manage it. So, came in with sort of a similar picture of really high blood sugars and them sitting me out if I was too high, or, checking ketones, things like that. So we were able to kind of work it down to where I was a lot more comfortable playing at, lower levels, closer to what's more normal. And then all of a sudden my play, just sort of took off. And so I do sort of regret not having that same insight. But, I also remember I was like 15, 16 years old. So I forgive myself for not being stringent. But yes, once I had, I literally would have like so Yale has the local, so Quinnipiac University is there as well. And so we had the benefit of having a lot of student trainers. And so there would always be a student trainer with me with things to help me have my blood sugar increase if I was low, or, would kind of get on me if it was too high, or check my ketones again. So kind of that like one-on-one, major attention that a Division I program can afford, especially one that has a partnership with student trainers, was really helpful. And so once I was able to, sort of work with, and also like my strength and conditioning coach, Emil Johnson, was a big help as well. And so, having kind of all these different interested parties helped me gain better control was super important. And I was able to kind of find my own success. And so this then transitioned into, so I started my junior year of college. I had then moved from tight end to right tackle. And so as a returning starter my senior year, the local press was sort of doing profiles on people who were returning and kind of getting the story. And I sort of mentioned casually that I had diabetes, and that had been, one of the better elements of my college experience, was kind of getting that under tighter control and having a lot of system playing field as a result. And that sort of became the, main kind of crux of the story. And from there, I just was inundated with, Facebook messages and emails from people who had read it, asking for help and wanting me to talk to their sons and daughters. And that's when it sort of clicked that, because I always, especially with my mother being a pediatrician, she never, necessarily wanted me to also be a doctor, but I was sort of I guess, accustomed to medicine in general, just, from osmosis essentially. And and because of my own diagnosis, I became kind of more interested in the human body and kind of your body's physiologic processes. So I kind of went into high school, mostly college, like kind of thinking medicine and kind of taking pre-med classes. But, from that point, prior to the story being read and people reaching out to me, I always kind of call myself like a passive pre-med. Like I was doing it, I was going through the motions, but I really didn't have an idea of how I wanted to go and if I would really continue or if I would, jump to, move that finance or consulting or some other type of field that a lot of my Yale classmates were doing. But once, again, the story was written about me and a lot of people then reached out to me, that was, I guess, my kind of light bulb moment. And that was when I realized, okay, I really have something to add, something to give out. My story is important, and people really look to me to sort of help them, and that's something that really registered with me, and that's something that became really important to me. And so it was really that moment that, because I wasn't even, my med school application wasn't even close to ready. I hadn't taken the MCAT, which is necessary for admission or anything, but I knew that I was going to go into healthcare and I was going to do my part, whether it be from like a startup process or, health consulting. That's when I decided to go into public health as well. I knew that healthcare and then eventually affecting the diabetic community was going to be my life plan. And so that really sort of solidified my medical goals, and I kind of went from there.
So while at Yale, and you mentioned a couple different kind of subsectors there, but was there an idea that you had in mind, or like a vision that you had in mind in terms of, all right, I want to solve like a certain inefficiency, in the healthcare market, or I'd like to give back to the community in this specific way? Or was it more just a general, I'd like to give back, my stories resonated clearly with the community, and that was kind of the impetus. Right. And going forward now through your residencies and dialing into a certain specialty, has that sort of solidified for you at all in terms of, what your specific vision is for helping the T1D community?
Yeah, so it's definitely been an evolving question. I would say once I realized the story resonated, that sort of became something. And then actually this guy named Charlie O'Connell, who runs Glucozone, formerly FitScript, out in New Haven, also reached out to me, and I had a lot of good conversation with him about how, say, certain heart rates can impact how your blood glucose is affected by certain exercise, which then kind of helped me also further tighten down my control. And so, yeah, I would answer the question as one, to definitely help the community. Once I realized that with Charlie that there was a market efficiency in using exercise as a way to control your blood glucose, that then became part of my goal, part of my life plan. And then taking it into medicine, I can kind of further expand upon it as not just helping diabetes however I can and incorporating exercise. But I first, wanted to go into endocrinology, realized that wasn't sort of the overall field to me. And now I can kind of say, well, I want to incorporate both exercise and mental health as far as how to best help the community. So, as far as how exactly all those play in, I'm definitely sort of playing around with some ideas. They are definitely all sort of connected, and it's been sort of fun to watch it all unfold in front of my eyes, because everything I've done thus far as school has needed kind of a step. So I haven't really needed the exact plan thus far, but the more steps I take and the deeper I get into this process, and now as a fourth-year student going into actually my residency and becoming an MD, I'm able to kind of use more of the resources afforded me to find exactly, how these things sort of play a part. Because it's been shown that exercise can help diabetes. It's been shown that exercise can help your mental health. And so I think there's obviously a clear sort of linear line of how exercise can affect both. In my opinion, a lot of your diabetes management and other kind of chronic health management has a lot less to do with like your deep medical biological understanding, and more just like how can we form better habits and how can we feel better about the management that we do and the way we treat ourselves and the way we feel about ourselves. And so that's kind of becoming a picture that's making itself to me more clear. And honestly, it's just really exciting to get to this point and kind of see where it takes me.
It's exciting, man. Yeah, I think exercise, especially for diabetics, but otherwise, other chronic illnesses as well. Exercise is one of the most neglected treatments in terms of preventing diseases, but at the same time, especially for diabetics, one of the most cost-effective and cheap, I guess if you want to call it, like drugs or treatments that you can take in terms of getting more stable blood sugar levels. But over the
Yeah,
course
and so prescribing,
yeah.
well, just I'm going to stop there for a second. Yeah, prescribing exercise is something that's like relatively new, but we are starting to see it a little bit, and so I definitely want to be on that forefront. I know for me, kind of anecdotally, having a strong kind of baseline exercise level from sports or just sort of my active life otherwise, if I'm not able to exercise, I do feel worse about myself, and my blood sugars are just, automatically in less control. I think I become a little bit insulin resistant. And so, you really see in myself like clear examples of how it can kind of better your control and sort of better your thought process in general and your feelings in general.
Yeah, I think there are some really cool developments that are kind of about to be ushered in this next wave of innovation that kind of package exercise along with it's funny, you mentioned glucagon. I think I just came across them a few days ago, but that app-based almost gamification of exercise in terms of being a prescriptive treatment for diabetics and people with other chronic illnesses as well. That's really kind of an exciting new wave of innovation in the field of medicine.
Yeah, that's a good way to kind of better the access. That's sort of my public health background and sort of another kind of niche within psychiatry. I want to increase access to those who aren't able to get it. It's no secret that it can be hard to see your provider as often as you would like, or people come from, hours away to see their doctor, and obviously the costs are going up and up. And so I think using technology, especially apps and other sort of devices, in order to kind of be that filler and really take the place of not replace obviously, but to kind of augment rather some of the care that you're getting from your doctor's office is really important. And so from someone who's now on the provider side, I feel like that's a new wave of intervention that I want to be a part of, and I'm excited to kind of see where the sort of where the field as a whole goes.
So is there a single thing that you can kind of look at over the course of your time at Yale and also your residencies as well that has kind of been the most important discovery for you? And this could be in terms of your own diabetic treatment, but also it could be kind of more broadly about the community as well.
That's a good question. Most important thing. I would say my most important, as far as my diabetes treatment, especially in the face of exercise and football, is just being comfortable being at a lower glucose level. I think a lot of people are just, again, it harkens back to the way I felt in high school, where I was fine being in the 200s, even the 300s sometimes, just because I just didn't want to go low. And so, on that front, I would say two things. A routine was probably like my biggest help, especially in the context of college and Division I football, where I kind of know what the schedule is. I know what we're eating. Developing a routine was insanely helpful just because there's going to be so many variables as far as how tired you are and what type of kind of general life events happen that can impact your blood sugar. So just kind of controlling what you can control and at least having a handle on that was super important. And then again, just being comfortable being closer to the normal level. So for me personally, I like to play between like 130 and 170, which for a lot of people, when they first are dealing with diabetes and exercise, is a little bit lower than they're comfortable with being. And I know some people that run marathons, below the level of 100. So I never got there in my college career. I don't mind sometimes being a little bit lower, now that the stakes aren't as high, and if I have to, take a second from exercise, I'm not, disappointing thousands of fans and the rest of my team. It definitely is something that I think a lot of diabetics have to kind of get over that fear and operate at a lower glucose level. But what you get back as far as energy and mental clarity and kind of overall fitness and is just monumental at those lower levels as opposed to at the higher ones. So that was kind of my biggest revelation, along with, again, just being very regimented, because both those together sort of was what was the big breakthrough for me.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I mean, I also had a training staff that was really on me, especially my senior year, in terms of making sure that I was between 80 and I don't remember what the upper range was, but they would hold me out for 15 minutes if I went below 80. And
sure, it
was certainly high stakes. But in terms of my own, the pressure that I put on myself, once I started doing internships and getting into corporate settings, and it was almost like for me more high stakes then. And I definitely know what you mean when it comes to erring on the side of caution to a fault. So I would say, all right, I'm not going to go low, and I would end up riding the whole day between 170 and 220. And of course, that that sounds fine juxtaposed to crashing at 50 or 60, but over the course of a lifetime, as you can certainly attest to, through your studies, that can be hugely detrimental in terms of long-term complications. So I definitely think there's an argument to be made for trying to kind of get outside your comfort zone and ride a little bit lower. And I don't think either of us are talking about driving our numbers down into the low 70s or anything like that, but 80, 90, 100 as opposed to, like 150, 160. And I think, like you said, in the moment, you'll definitely feel better, but extrapolate that over 30 or 40 or 50 years, then you're talking about serious improvements in terms of your like long-term health. But I wanted to.
And where did you play?
Carnegie Mellon. So it was Division III in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
Not quite the level of Yale, but I was looking at a few Ivy League schools. But I'm a 5'8" running back, so
sure.
Ultimately, just they were saying too small to play at that level. But yeah, no, it was I had an awesome time, and as I'm sure you know, it's tough walking away from it. This is my first August without football, so I'm definitely missing the games and feeling washed up. Sucks, but I wanted.
They say athletes die 2 times, and I definitely understand where that sentiment comes from.
Oh yeah, no, it's tough. But I wanted to go back to, there was a phrase that I read about in your article, and it was sudden change. And it kind of sounded like that was a bit of a rallying cry for you, and that you've been able to apply that to your life, and not only in athletic context, but also with regard to your diabetes. Can you talk about how you apply that to your life?
Yeah, so sudden change isn't that monumental of a phrase, but it definitely is just super applicable. And even though you kind of hear, oh well, the past is the past, or kind of keep your mind forward, just that phrase, just knowing that phrase, and then it was always in the context of 3 air horn whistles for us. And so the context that wasn't in football was we would be in the middle of individual, where for the audience, you're kind of working on individual skills. You might be in some sort of, team or some other kind of activity, and then all of a sudden you would hear those 3 sounds. They would tell a field that we were all sprinting to. We would go, and it would be, some sort of quote-unquote life or death situation, 4th and 1 on the 1-yard line to win the game or so. And the whole thing was just sort of keep us on our toes and to not get flustered by the fact that we were, doing something that had to do something completely different. As you can imagine, that really kind of comes into play a lot of times in life in general, especially diabetes. So I've noticed in general, it was something that we thought was kind of on the cornier side at the time. However, we did buy into it, especially just because it happened, all the time in practice and in workouts and things. Not everyone sort of has that mindset, and I've sort of experienced that. People do get flustered, and people do waste a lot of time sort of complaining about why we're in the situation instead of, kind of going forth and making the best of it. And that's sort of diabetes, in a nutshell. And with diabetes, you'll be doing all sorts of activities, whether it be studying or exercising or just sort of trying to kind of lay low. And your blood sugar will tell you all of a sudden you need to do something about this. Maybe you have a kink in your insulin pump and your blood sugars are just sky high, even though you've bolused multiple time corrections. Or, maybe, you're using pens and you're out of needles all of a sudden and you just have no way of getting it. Or for whatever reason, you're maybe a little more active or you're a little more stressed out, and you just shoot down out of nowhere. So you have 2 options. You can sit there and you could pout about the fact that you're crashing down into the 50s, on a date, or that you're just trying to sit back and watch the game at home, and all of a sudden you're shoot up to the 400s. Or you can just sort of accept the reality of the situation and do something about it, and then also importantly, kind of learn from the situation. And so that's generally how I apply that sudden change to my diabetic life. I, don't spend a lot of time lamenting over the fact of the situation that I'm in. I try to think back about what got me here. Maybe I skip breakfast, or maybe I, spent a day too late at the same pump injection site, and I should have changed it out. And I kind of, make that mental note for the next time, and then go ahead and go about my business. Luckily, we are at the point with our medications and sort of the advancements in diabetes that, you can pretty easily make adjustments and kind of figure out what went wrong. And that's kind of part of the regimented schedule that is important to me as well, because you don't want to be making sudden changes every single time you exercise or every single time you have something important to do. You don't want to be in the corporate setting in front of a big meeting and just crashing for absolutely no reason. You want to kind of learn from your mistakes and find out ways to generally avoid them. So keeping the regimen scheduled to avoid the sudden changes, but when they come, taking it in stride and making the best of the situation is sort of really important to, my overall success, both as an athlete, as a diabetic, and then as a future doctor too.
Yeah, no, diabetes is a constant learning process, and anytime you start to get too complacent with your care, and you're like, all right, I've got a good A1C, things going well, I'm super stable, I got my CGM, I'm going to my phone, it's great, and then all of a sudden you crash, or you have one of those situations, like you said, where you have a kink in the pump, and it's it seems like T1D can crop up at the most inconvenient of times, like you said, on a date or something.
For
like
sure.
But,
For sure.
Kind of like Murphy's Law on that front. But I was going to ask you what your message was, more broadly to the T1D community, but I think you kind of answered that. You always need to be ready to adapt to any situation because, unfortunately, unlike athletics, there's no schedule to T1D, and it's always going to be there. But at the same time, you don't have to attach these negative emotions to a certain high or a certain low or a certain event. You just have to be constantly learning.
I agree with that totally. Yeah, it's not really, again, you don't get too emotional about it, but just learn from it like you would any other situation, diabetes or not, and try to make the best of it. And people can be understanding, and as long as you sort of educate the folks around you. But also, I would say as part of the message too, don't be embarrassed about your situation. You didn't put it upon yourself. It just sort of is what it is. And as we become kind of more health literate as a culture, people tend to be more understanding, and ultimately it's important for your own health. So sometimes you do have to kind of take a step back. But if you're prepared for it, if you have snacks if you're low, and if you have alternate sources of insulin, you'll find yourself in less of those kind of embarrassing or inopportune moments, and you'll be able to kind of ride through it. But I recommend to everyone. Again, I think you sort of have a similar background with me. I never hit it, but I also wasn't as vocal about it. But you should be. It doesn't have to be a look at me type of situation, but you find people being a lot more compassionate when they have kind of a heads up and advance notice. So you can kind of get a lot of those fears out, especially socially, if everyone knows what's going on and you're not really embarrassed and you're able to sort of handle your situation as you need to be. And then, again, learn from it so it doesn't happen the same way again. That's been really helpful for me, and I think that's helpful for the rest of your audience too.
Perfect. All right, Roy. Well, I don't want to keep you too long because you're a very busy guy. I think you deserve some time to yourself tonight. But again, thank you so much for coming on. I know I can speak for myself when I say I appreciate you going into the the medical profession field and trying to give back to this community on the provider side. Hopefully, we see you doing amazing things for the T1D community and the broader community overall as a doctor. So thank you again, man. I appreciate it.
Appreciate you inviting me on, man. I had a great time talking. And go T1D.
Absolutely.
I'm Roy Collins. I have T1D, and I have a game plan.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Game Plan T1D podcast. For related content, please visit www.gameplant1d.com or follow us on social media @GamePlanT1D. Find your game plan.